The Daytona International Speedway, arguably North America's most famous racetrack, home to the Daytona 24-hour, as well as the Daytona 500. This would be the track that would be host to the series that I ran in 2025, and the whole purpose of this video series, the Ferrari Challenge North American Series. If you haven't watched that first video, I highly recommend going and watching it. It'll give you a little bit of context to the series as well as where we're at exactly in the championship. But if you haven't and you want just a bit of a recap, here it is. To put it short, I totally f***ed up race 1, got myself a penalty, and in race 2 made up for it and left Sonoma barely leading the championship. And of course, I wasn't very pleased with myself because I felt like I had way more to give. I had 2 pole positions, 2 fastest laps, but only 1 win to show for it because I was an incompetent idiot and totally effed it up. But that's racing, unfortunately. But thankfully, I was able to leave there with a fresh mind and prepare myself for Daytona, which is one of my top bucket list tracks. I had been so unbelievably excited for this racetrack because I was racing on what I considered the best track in North America. Home to the Daytona 24-hour, which is the most premier event in North America for motorsports, maybe minus the Indy 500, of course. But I was so excited to drive here and to get to see what this famous track would race like in the event that I get to race it at some point in the future, hopefully in the Daytona 24. But regardless, when we rocked up on the Wednesday for the first day of testing, I was very pleasantly surprised because the track was not as simple as sims make it. I'm sure that a lot of people have said this about a lot of other tracks, but this one was surprisingly hard. The infield is very flat, and because this racetrack is so old, there are so many different types of tarmac that it just seems to feel like you're driving on so many different surfaces at once, as well as it just feels like you're on ice. It feels like you're skating. And not to mention for this weekend, the Pirelli tires that we are running, they've been a fantastic compound all year, but for some reason at Daytona, they were giving us a little bit of an issue, more than just a little bit of an issue, because the high banks and the high G load that the cars were being put under, and the tires as well, consequentially, were causing the tires to blow up. And this wasn't just an isolated issue that happened to 1 or 2 people. This was happening to a lot of different people. And of course, as you can imagine, the very high speeds of Daytona, especially in the draft, this would be a massive red flag to everybody in the paddock. And not to mention Pirelli, who was there and is present at every single race weekend, immediately decided to mandate that everyone needs to run a high minimum pressure. While this means that cars will typically in races be running peak pressure of around, let's say 27 PSI, maybe 28, that our minimum pressure would be around 30. And if any of you have done any racing before, or even any sim racing, and have thrown your tire pressure up to something that high, it's like driving on ice. It's truly terrifying, and especially when you're battling for position and going door to door, mirror to mirror with some guys, this was really difficult, especially because this is something that we had no data on. No one had any data on. This is because Ferrari Challenge hadn't been to Daytona in years, and so no one really had any data. The Pirelli officials didn't have any data, and this just caused it to be a little bit of a mess. But we were able to dial in our setup on the less than ideal tire pressures. Even then, we were very susceptible to some issues. I'll go ahead and throw in some clips as well of just what the driving conditions were like, just to give you an idea. It was less than ideal at best and really frustrating at worst because you felt like no matter what you did, the car didn't want to rotate, and then when it did want to rotate, it wanted to absolutely chuck you into the nearest gravel, grass, or even wall. The only consolation of this is that we weren't the only ones dealing with it. Everyone had to figure it out at the same time, and even throughout the duration of practice, we had a pretty good pace. I was very happy with how the car was progressing, and then before I knew it, race weekend was upon us. Now today I'm just going to talk about race 1 because this race weekend was so packed with action and really hard racing that I think it wouldn't be doing it justice to cram 2 races into one video just like the last one. So this video is going to be just about race 1. Now, when it came to the qualifying scenario and exactly what that looked like, I wasn't very happy with my performance in the slightest. The car, let me back up. Typical racing driver thing. Had nothing to do with the car. I was driving like a bitch. I didn't want to push it for whatever reason, and I was just not very confident in the car or myself at the time. Why? I have no idea. Looking back at the video, it really didn't make sense. I can very clearly find some areas where I was able to push a little bit harder, deeper into some places, a little harder on the exits. I'll show you guys the qualifying lap from this. Had nothing to do with the car. It had everything to do with how I was driving it. I wasn't driving it very well at all. I wasn't driving it hard enough. Clearly, by the fact that I only got P3, showed that there was a lot more for me to push, and for some reason, I can't understand why I didn't have even the slightest bit of confidence in the car. So this is something that I took to heart, really, and I wanted to fix really, really bad, not only for the race this afternoon, but for Sunday. Now, to give you a little bit of context to Daytona itself, I'm sure most of you guys, if you're watching this video, have probably heard about the Daytona 24 Hours and more than likely have watched it. The reason I'm going on a bit of a tangent here is because this track is obviously very high speed, a lot of big straightaways, and you're on that very high banks that Daytona is famous for. The biggest thing with this racetrack and what makes it so interesting to race at is the fact that you are on these high banks and these straightaways for so long, which means the draft plays a huge factor in how the track races. Now, of course, as a young, hotshot, shit-headed racing driver, I thought I knew everything about drafting. I've seen plenty of videos. I've seen the supercar finish where Cam Waters goes flying by and catches a side draft. I thought I knew all of it, especially because I've done some sim racing and I thought I figured it out. But I had never experienced draft like I have at Daytona. It was truly something unbelievable. It felt like entering warp speed. Did another car pass you just coming onto the back straightaway? Not a problem. You have so much straightaway in front of you that you can just hop into the draft of the car that just passed you, and you'll be in front of them, totally clear, not even side by side, all the way into the next turn. It's unbelievable how much impact the draft has. So much, in fact, that we were seeing typically about 4 to 5 mile an hour differences coming down into turn 1. Not to mention the side draft effect. I'm sure some of you have understood the side draft effect even a little bit. The side draft is where when one car is slightly in front of you, but you've pulled out to make a move, you still get effects from that draft, as the front of your car aerodynamically will be pushing air off of it. And what that does when the air is getting pushed off of it and you are, let's say, right here to another car, that air getting pushed off of your car packs the rear fender of the car next to you and pretty much pulls a parachute on them, allowing you to pull ahead a little bit. But if you're not careful enough, this will work against you if you don't pull off of the car next to you soon enough. So the second your nose gets to about, let's say their door or their mirror, you need to pull off a car width so that they can't get any side draft benefit off of you. The most famous example of this is in 2025 at the very start of the Australian Supercar Championship, where Cam Waters managed to pass Brock Feeney on the last corner of the last lap using a side draft coming up to the line. He won the race by 0.03 seconds, and that was mainly in fact to how he pulled off his side draft. So back to the race itself, I was starting P3 on the inside. I was still pretty pissed at myself for my qualifying performance from that morning. I really had no game plan going in except to kind of tiptoe my way through the first few corners, just because I know Daytona can really catch people out. I've raced on the sim quite a lot, and people are really boneheaded into turn one, and I just didn't want to get stuffed in the outside or just get someone alongside me that's going to cause an issue. As the race gets underway, I get a really good launch, and I get right up to the gearbox of Johnny Kaminsky right in front of me. Unfortunately, due to the rules of Ferrari Challenge, you aren't allowed to pull out from your line and initiate a pass until you get across the start-finish line. So this means I need to lift and relinquish that really good launch, which allows P2 to slot in, and we go single file into the turn 2, 3, and then the international horseshoe. Coming through the infield section, I'm being very cautious on lap 1, just making sure that I'm not going to make any mistakes, and also gauge the cars in front of me, see how racy they are, see if they want to make some moves, and I can capitalize off them. But as we leave the infield and come out of turn 6, which throws us onto the Daytona high banks, I find myself really close up to Dylan Medler behind, and of course feeling the effects of that draft, I decide, well, no time like now, and I decide to throw a move. Now this of course means that I need to go on the high side, because like any racing driver, Dylan's going to cover off the inside. What I did right there is I just outbroke myself. That's straight up what I did. I didn't do anything but that. I thought I could have gotten away with going deeper, but what I didn't realize is because I was offline that I was going to understeer a little bit more than I would have liked to, because I wasn't able to get that optimal turn in because I obviously had a car on my inside. And so that meant I had to relinquish the advantage that I gained from the draft and then back to trying again. So like you just saw there, and kind of how I joked about a little bit earlier, I actually made the same mistake that I was talking about when it comes to pulling out too early. I made the move out of the bus stop here on lap 1 far too soon. I had a good advantage, but because I was so eager to try and get in front and catch up to Johnny all the way out there in P1, I went and pulled out of the draft, but it just ended up being a slow drag race. Even though I got that side draft and eventually got ahead of him, because I got ahead of him way too soon, he ended up getting the side draft off of me and then pulled out in front of me before we reached the braking zone for turn 1. So this inevitably worked to my disadvantage, and it's something that I obviously learned a lot from, but in the moment I was just pushing way too hard for my own good. Speaking of pushing a little bit too hard for my own good, this was a bit of a mistake in the opposite direction. I pulled out a little bit too late, but that's obviously because I was a little bit further back. But I thought, you know what? I've got a big head of speed. I've got a really, really big draft off of the car in front of me. I can try to make a late move. The move could have been on, but because I was going significantly faster than if I wasn't in the draft, I completely blew my braking zone, and I obviously ran deep, and I had to make up all that space again. But this ended up kind of working in my favor because Dylan was no longer looking in his mirrors and was able to catch up to Johnny, which meant we were going to end up in a 3-man train again. But inevitably, the safety car comes out and the field is neutralized, so we have to wait for that to get figured out. After multiple laps behind the safety car, we eventually get back going, green, and the racing is immediately back on. I'm already trying to find a way past the guy in front of me, and so is the car in front of me. We're jockeying for position back and forth. I'm not very happy with where I am, so I'm trying to drive really, really hard. Again, just like I said earlier, a little bit too hard for my own good. Now here a little bit later in the race, I try a little bit of a later move, just like before, but this time I was a little bit more wise to my mistakes from before, and I actually brake at the right marker. But from some good defending in front, I actually wasn't able to make anything out of this move. I just had to be a little bit closer when it came time to get into the braking zone and actually be alongside. So I was able to position my car in a way that would be to his detriment so that I could gain an advantage. So now that the car in front of me got around P1, the pressure was on for me because I needed to do the same if I wanted to have any chance of challenging for P1. Because if I didn't get around Johnny, who was now in P2, the cork in the bottle would remain and I wouldn't have any chance at the top spot on the podium. Immediately, I put the pressure on as I see he ran a little bit deep into turn 6, and I get a really good undercut here. My throttle on was great, and I was looking that I would have the inside for the bus stop. Because Johnny drove a great line and I was being a little bit too cautious, I ended up just relinquishing the advantage that I had and ended up giving it back just in the opportunity that I could have it on the next straightaway into turn 1. Finally, a move is made as I get something done into turn 1. Turns out that Johnny was having a little bit of an issue with his car. The E-diff was totally disconnected, so the car was behaving as if it had an open differential, which, for those of you that don't know, the differential makes sure that the wheels are spinning at a proportionate speed so that, you know, one isn't just burning out when you get on the throttle. That wasn't behaving properly on his car, and so, of course, he was totally roasting a tire anytime he tried to get on the throttle. This will be important a little bit later on in the weekend, though. But enough of that. I'm back in the hunt for P1, and I'm putting the pressure on. I'm driving my absolute hardest to try to catch up to him and to have a chance before time runs out. But you can see at this stage of the race, the tire is really falling off. It's getting really, really hot on in the surface, as well as the pressures are building up very high, which means it's ballooning, and that the contact patch is significantly less. But inevitably, before I can get any kind of work done, the safety car comes back out again, which means we're going to have some more laps under the safety car. This means that the race is over, unfortunately, because the officials elected that it wasn't enough time to go red flag and then eventually go back to green. So this is exactly how the race finished. Now, while I understand that a P2 is nothing to scoff at, I was still a little bit disappointed with my performance. I think that I totally could have had P1. I had a rocket ship of a race car. I was being very cautious, and I was being not as explorative as I should have been with some of my passing opportunities. Regardless, everything went about as well as it could have given the situation. I learned a lot to take into the Sunday race tomorrow, and was hopefully going to be able to capitalize on a lot of my mental and physical improvements. I know this video is going to be a little bit of a different style from my first one, where it's a bit of a cut commentary kind of thing, where I put in a lot more racing because, in all honesty, that's what you're here for. If this is something that you guys enjoyed a lot more, let me know, because I rewatched back my first video and that was a steaming pile of dog shit. So personally, this is something that I'd be a little bit more interested in. If it does interest you, let me know, and I will eventually make a Daytona Part 2 video. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.